Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Ventures Podcast. In the world of tech startups and entrepreneurship, the line between success and failure is razor thin. Every decision, pivot, and late night brainstorming session could tip the scales. In this episode of the Ventures series, we're diving into the stories behind the people, strategies, and insights that drive ventures and startups forward. Today's episode will feature a deep dive on Paul Graham's legendary essay, How to Do Great Work. We will look at what makes Joe Rogan the king of podcasting. We will look at what has driven the success of the All-In podcast and the besties there. We'll look at the China commodities supercycle that seems to be coming to an end and tie that into geopolitical analyst Peter Zeehan's opinions on some of the best allies for the U.S. in the coming decades. And finally, wrap up with an excellent talk by Marc Andreessen at the Hoover Institute. So stay tuned and looking forward to diving into these with you. All right, so let's dive into Paul Graham's essay, How to Do Great Work. If you don't know Paul Graham, then you probably should if you're interested in startups, because he's one of the godfathers of Silicon Valley today. He's a software entrepreneur himself, and most notably, the founder of Y Combinator, the most successful startup accelerator in the world. And his blog is one of the largest and most insightful collections of straightforward startup wisdom that you can find. So today I'm going to dive into just a few tidbits of my favorite points from his essay, How to Do Great Work. He's got many other great essays that we will dive into, from How to Do What You Love, Founder Mode, and many, many more. So, he's a prolific writer with hundreds and hundreds of essays that you can check out, with really great firsthand experience from seeing more startups than almost anyone in the world. All right, so many people want to know how to do great work. And so what does Paul Graham have to say about how to do great work, meaningful work that has an impact on the world and that you love and that gives you meaning and really helps you to make your dent in the universe, as Steve Jobs would say? So now I'll read you an excerpt from the start of the essay by Paul Graham. If you collected a list of techniques for doing great work in a lot of different fields, what would the intersection look like? I decided to find out by making it. Partly, my goal was to create a guide that could be used by someone working in any field. But I was also curious about the shape of the intersection. And one thing this exercise shows is that it does have a definite shape. It's not just a point labeled work hard or grind, as I like to say. The following recipe assumes you're very ambitious. The first step is to decide what to work on. The work you choose needs to have three qualities. It has to be something you have a natural aptitude for, that you have a deep interest in, and that offers the scope to do great work. So this is how he kicks off this essay on how to do great work. Here he's taking an intellectual journey to try to explore this concept of, is there any similarities between the best minds in the world, the best physicists, the best entrepreneurs, and how they were able to do something great with their career? Develop a habit of working on your own projects. Don't let work mean something other people tell you to do. If you do manage to do great work one day, it will probably be on a project of your own. It may be within some bigger project, but you'll be driving your part of it. What should your project be? Whatever seems to you excitingly ambitious. And he's going to talk about this again. Excitingly ambitious. Those are keys. As you grow older and your taste in projects evolves, exciting and important will converge. At 7, it may seem excitingly ambitious to build huge things out of Lego. Or for me, building forts in the woods was the go-to. Then at 14, teach yourself calculus. Till at 21, you're starting to explore unanswered questions in physics, but always preserve the excitingness. There's a kind of exciting curiosity that are both the engine and the rudder of doing great work. It will not only drive you, but if you let it have its way, will also show you what to work on. What are you excessively curious about? Curious to a degree that would bore most other people. That's what you're looking for. And this is critical. What is something that you are so curious about that would make other people bored? They wouldn't stick with it. They wouldn't do the reps. They wouldn't take the shots. They wouldn't read the papers. They wouldn't practice it. They wouldn't build mock-ups. That is a key to understanding where you should focus and where you can do great work. Paul Graham lays out 4 steps to doing great work. So you need to choose a field. You need to learn enough to get to the frontier. You need to notice gaps and explore the promising ones. This is how practically everyone who's done great work has done it, from painters to physicists. Step 2 and 4 will require hard work. It may not be possible to prove that you have to work hard to do great things, but the empirical evidence is on the scale of the evidence for mortality. That's why it's essential to work on something you're deeply interested in. Interest will drive you to work harder than mere diligence ever could. The 3 most powerful motives are curiosity, delight, and desire to do something impressive. Sometimes they converge, and that combination is the most powerful of all. So here he really talks about that you have to choose what you want to do, learn enough to get to the frontier, notice the gaps, and explore the promising ones. So it's not just doing the work to be an average player. You have to want to be ambitious, and you have to be curious enough to ask yourself, what are the gaps? Where is the frontier on the edge of this? If you're doing marketing, you have to get to the edges where people are experimenting and trying new things, what's working. If you're building software, where are the areas where innovations in compute or usability or a new industry, a new user experience could really change the way people do things? And he talks about this concept throughout this essay as well, that many times doing great work, it's about the hard work and the practice, but it's also about the fundamental question of what to work on. And often the greatest insights will be because the person asked the right question, they chose the right problem to solve. If you go and you really look at something from first principles and you see that, can we make this rocket reusable? That would completely change the launch market, like Elon Musk did. Those types of questions where you look for some way to create leverage. This is another concept that Naval Ravikant talks about constantly, is making sure you find leverage, find an edge. You hear that again and again throughout business. And if you can find that leverage in what you're doing, then you can make that impact and really do something significant with your career.
I think that I saw on the Daily Ramsey show, and it's something identical to what Paul Graham is saying. It was that they conducted a study over 22 years, I think it was, over some of the most successful people and some of the people who are not deemed as that successful. What they found out is that the most successful people, what they all had in common was that they're out there solving problems. They're out there asking themselves, what is the problem and how can we solve them? Compared to the people who are not as successful. They see a problem and then they're like, hey, this is where we're starting. So I think there's some common ground in these two people, and I think kind of the universal topic here.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's across disciplines and across fields, so it's really no matter what you want to do in life. He's writing this essay to apply to anyone. And, the language and the lessons really apply to anything from investing to writing to painting, whatever it might be. So yeah, it's really interesting. All right. So let's go to the next. So back to the essay. One sign that you're suited for some kind of work is when you like even the parts the other people find tedious or frightening. This is a key right here. But fields aren't people. You don't owe them any loyalty. If in the course of working on one thing, you discover another that's more exciting, don't be afraid to switch. He already mentioned this before, and now we get back to it again. It's about being excited, being curious and ambitious in what you're trying to do. That's going to lead to great work. Well, you need boldness. You don't usually need much planning. This is a little counterintuitive than most people I talk to or the conventional way of thinking about success. All of these questions, right? But that's not what Paul Graham says here. You need boldness. You don't usually need much planning. In most cases, the recipe for doing great work is simple. Work hard on excitingly ambitious projects, and something good will come of it. Instead of making a plan and then executing it, you just try to preserve certain invariants. The trouble with planning is that it only works for achievements you can describe in advance. You can win a gold medal or get rich by deciding to, as a child, and then tenaciously pursue that goal. But you can't discover natural selection that way. I think for most people who want to do great work, the right strategy is not to plan too much. At each stage, do whatever seems most interesting and gives you the best options for the future. I call this approach staying upwind. This is how most people who've done great work seem to have done it. So there's obviously discipline and hard work involved here, but I think what a lot of motivated and ambitious people ignore or don't give enough credit to is doing things for the right reasons. Steve Jobs said this, we mentioned this before. The older he got, the more he realized the reasons why people do things matters. And this is exactly what Paul Graham is saying here. You have to follow your curiosity. It's not, you don't connect the dots looking forward, you connect them looking back. You need to follow your genuine curiosity. That's how your specific skills are going to emerge. That's how your gift is going to emerge. Especially in the world today where everything is democratized with the internet, you have to compete against the whole world. So you better make sure whatever you choose to do, you're more curious than anyone else. This is something, as he said before, where you need to find the tedious and boring bits of this industry to be fun. You need to love to sit there and nerd out on topics like researching Paul Graham or researching startups or figuring out different brushstrokes for your painting or understanding how low-level assembly language will work for your controller, fill in the gap. You have to you want to be thinking about it in the shower. You want to be thinking about it before bed. Ideally, you're having dreams of it too. It's always good to find things to where your mind is just naturally floating towards that. You're thinking about it all day. You're always working the problem. This is something that Richard Hamming talks about as well. A legendary researcher at Bell Labs. He talked about how the great ones are always working the problem. They go on a walk, on a hike up in the mountains, and they're working the problem. They're obsessed with what they do. All right, so now we're going to get into another very important concept in entrepreneurship, in doing great work, investing, and that is the concept of compounding. If you do work that compounds, you'll get exponential growth. Most people who do this do it unconsciously, but it's worth stopping to think about. Learning, for example, is an instance of this phenomenon. The more you learn about something, the easier it is to learn more. Growing an audience is another. The more fans you have, the more new fans they'll bring in. The trouble with exponential growth is that the curve feels flat at the beginning, but it isn't. It's still a wonderful exponential curve, but we can't grasp that intuitively. So we underrate exponential growth in its early stages. I mean, this is genius. You could be working on exactly the right thing. You could be working on the next billion-dollar company. And the facts are that overnight success is 5-10 years in the making. And you're doing the work, you were building the foundation of that exponential growth. And so whether it's learning or in your career, finding things that compound is a superpower and it gives you leverage like nothing else. So really great insight on doing great work, learning and understanding that all that knowledge and work you do, it stacks and it grows. Love that concept.
I also think that concept kind of ties into everything else. I mean, you mentioned career and learning, but it can go beyond that. It could be hobbies. It can be, I mean, as much as going to the gym as well. It doesn't just happen overnight. right? So I think it talks about like, I think, a universal principle, and it's kind of interesting to see it all aligned to different parts of your life too.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I've been reading a lot of Naval for a long time, and we'll cover him in future episodes, but he talks a lot about compounding and the importance of compounding as well. And you see this a lot in some of the great thinkers of today's age. They realize that you need to find those areas of focus, work, investing, where you get that compounding. And it's going to be a grind in those early days, but you are building something that's evergreen, that's going to continue to grow and grow. So, it's also the concept of wealth. Like the concept of wealth is that you should have your money working for you so you can have freedom. So yes, it takes time in those early days to build those assets so that you can truly be wealthy. But then you actually can live off of the growth of those assets. And that same momentum applies to your career and the learning that you have in whatever specialization you choose. So it's a really powerful concept we see again and again.
Exactly. And that's also where you can also then tie in the delayed gratification concept, right? You can't
Yep.
expect anything tomorrow.
Yeah, exactly. All right. And now let's wrap things up. So curiosity is the best guide. Your curiosity never lies, and it knows more than you do about what's worth paying attention to. Notice how often the word has come up. If you asked an oracle the secret to doing great work, the oracle replied with a single word. My bet would be on curiosity. Awesome. So maybe the oracle of Delphi might tell you to know yourself, but Paul Graham's going to say curiosity when it comes to doing great work. So, and what I love about this too is it's actually the most fun. Like what you're most curious about, what you're most ambitious to do is the most fun. And so it's really a win-win. It's not, oh, you have to do the hardest thing with the best potential and you have to just sit there with a spreadsheet all day and do boring stuff. No, you do the work that you are genuinely the most curious about. And that's the path towards success. And you don't even have to stick with that exact topic. You can move to the next topic that interests you because that knowledge will broaden your understanding and help you make connections that will allow you to do great work. So just a few insights. We'll do a deeper dive into all of my favorite insights from Paul Graham's essay, How to Do Great Work. But hopefully you got something today that will help you and inspire you to follow your curiosity, identify what you want to work on, make sure that you learn enough to get to the frontiers and identify those gaps so that you can really find a new bud of knowledge where you find, a new area of physics, a new way of doing marketing, a new style of approaching your craft. And fundamentally, you have to be ambitious. He says in this article as well, like, if you don't want to be the best, you're going to have a hard time even being good in your field. So you got to want to be the best. You got to stay curious and just have fun with it. Great essay by Paul Graham and some awesome insights for founders. All right. So what makes Joe Rogan the podcast king? We could go on and on about this. So we're just going to do a quick coverage of some of the aspects that have led him to be the top podcast in the world. Starting out in around 2009, he's been very early to the game and has a very unique approach. I mean, what you see with this new long form media, you see things like authenticity at scale. You see the personality of someone. You're watching 3-4 hours of them talking to someone in a conversation. You really get an idea of the person you're interacting with. You have fun with them. You hear some, in Joe Rogan's case, some wild jokes that make it a good time. And also some awesome questions and some great, brilliant minds. And you see a genuinely curious person who wants to understand issues. He wants to respect his guests, hear them out, and just have the best conversation in a human way. So, there's many, many things you could say about Joe Rogan, but we'll dive into a few of the things that I think stand out in making his podcast one of my favorite podcasts in the world and the most popular podcast in the world. I don't know if you want to jump in before we dive into more specifics and some clips.
I think it's the curiosity what have led to become such a big dominant figure within the podcast world, because I think what is interesting about the Joe Rogan experience is, you're watching someone who's just sitting there and who's genuinely curious about different topics. And it's not even like one specific industry. It's like one time it's just about
It's like hundreds, thousands. Like,
exactly.
yeah.
Right. And those are the things where when you're in a classroom and you're not willing to ask specific questions. Well, he is going to these people and really just saying whatever is on his mind, no matter if they're dumb or stupid, because he's not knowledgeable about it to a certain extent. So I think that is what is really fun about watching it. And then obviously the jokes and I don't know, the purity of the content, like how genuine it is. I think that just makes it look.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, at the end of the day, like if you want to have something entertaining, having comedy is good. And he has the best comedians in the world on his show all the time. So, it's really a great combination. I mean, there's like the really insightful episodes with like top entrepreneurs or scientists, but then you also have like Protect Our Parks, where it's just the boys having a good time messing around. Or also the other crew they do of all the jujitsu boys, just another set of boys messing around, having a good time. It's excellent. I love it. So let's dive into actually, it's fun to take a peek here at Joe Rogan's very first episode. Let's see what things look like. All right, this is hilarious.
Update to Twitter.
I mean, they got like snowflakes falling, Make Me Hard in the background. I mean, Joe's a comedian. He's a comedian. I love it. And what a superpower to be a comedian. I got to definitely become a comedian because it's the ultimate hack to be able to say whatever you want. And I'm a comedian. I can say whatever I want,
Hello, world. The fuck is going on? The questions are coming in now. How are you guys doing?
Can you believe we go from this to like hosting presidential candidates? It's like so epic. It's such an epic turnaround. Like he just looks like any, random dude just hanging out, joking around with their friends, playing games right now.
Now, obviously, everybody knows who he is, but if someone were not to know who he is and was watching the Joe Rogan podcast, I'm pretty sure they would find a couple similarities between this video and the video now. I mean, just like the nudity behind it, right? It's like just genuine, just him sitting up on the camera, and yeah, just being.
Yeah, and it's like, I think we also went from a time in the world when you had to be this type of person on television and on these shows, and you couldn't step out of line, out of your script and how you're supposed to say it. And now with the internet and with podcasting, we care about authentic, real people. People say jokes, people mess around, people have a good time, and they can be some of the best people in the world. You don't always have to be suited up, acting so appropriate and politically correct. People want to get to know the real you. They don't want the talking head who never says anything controversial. They want to really hear what you think and why you think it. And then, of course, show this one of the most legendary moments in Joe Rogan as well.
So is that a joint? Or is it a cigar?
No,
Okay.
it's marijuana instead of tobacco.
Oh, okay. So it's like pot tobacco,
Yeah.
posh.
You never had that?
Yeah, I think I tried one once.
Come on, man.
You probably can't because stockholder.
I mean,
Like, I can do anything. It's all legal.
Okay.
How does that work? Do people get upset at you if you do certain things? It's tobacco and marijuana in there. That's all it is.
There's the meme right there. Also, another key to breaking free and being able to say whatever you want is to be an entrepreneur and be your own boss. So Elon Musk can run a public company and still jump on Joe Rogan and take a hit of weed because he can do whatever he wants within reason, of course, but he's a free person and he can be his authentic self. And, some people will hate him for it. Many people will love him for it, but it had to show this highlight as well. A legendary moment that just broke the internet when this happened. So I focused on like some of the more fun things from Joe Rogan today, but realistically, probably like 70% of the time, I'm listening to something where I'm learning a ton. I mean, in that Elon interview, there's tons of great insights that you get. Recently, He did a great interview with Russell Crowe that I loved, where Russell Crowe really break down his career and how he approaches life and making decisions to kind of follow his own curiosity and stay true to himself. You obviously have also incredibly funny shows, like shows with Dio Vaughn or Protect Our Parks with the boys. And so just, I think the variety of content, I mean, he's doing like 3 of these a week, often 3-hour sessions. So he's getting a high quantity of some of the most interesting people in the world that he's talking to. And he's just authentic, curious, and at this point, really well read and well versed in a lot of the issues he's talking to people about around the world. So yeah, those are probably my main insights, I would say, into what make Joe Rogan's podcast so successful. It's really like Joe Rogan at scale. Like, he's just an interesting, fun person to listen to, and people gravitate to him. All right, another great podcast, one of my favorites, the All In podcast with the besties. Unfortunately, these days, David Sachs has bigger and better things to do, so we don't get him roasting Jason as much anymore. But, you know, these guys are one of my go-tos. I'm always listening to this as soon as it comes out. Lots of great insights specifically for tech entrepreneurs and investors. Obviously, all of these guys are deep in Silicon Valley, venture capital, and have been involved with some of the most successful startups in the world. And they bring a very unique mix of insights and very well-researched insights into some of the topics they cover, really bringing an angle that you don't see anywhere else. You know, they're talking to some of the smartest people around the world to get their insights on, you know, what happened recently with the yield curve changing, or Friedberg talking about Ray Dalio's concept of a debt spiral, and really being one of the main voices that potentially could have impacted the Department of Government Efficiency movement that we now see today. You have Jason, obviously, with a history of covering lots of startups and being involved as an investor and venture capitalist in companies like his favorite, Hoover, where he's securing the bag. And then, you know, you have David Sachs, who obviously a member of the PayPal mafia, and bringing some of my favorite insights into geopolitics, investing, and startups. So let's dive into some fun clips from the All In pod that I think kind of show a little bit of the flavor of what makes this great. And then we'll dive into some insights into why they've been able to become one of the best podcasts in the world, or as Jason likes to say, the best podcast in the world. All right, again and again with top content, like a red thread we're seeing is authenticity and relationships and interactions that are human and real. And here we have a funny moment with David Sachs copying Chamath's style on the pod.
This, Jason,
Oh, really?
is the thin summer gelée. Okay.
Really?
Beautiful cashmere.
Continue.
It's called like the King's Cashmere or something. And then this is called a
Very-
lovely yellow boating sweater. Anyways, I took Sachs to my tailor, and I took him to Loro Piana. And then at some point I just fucking lost them, and then I haven't seen him since. So,
You took him to your tailor and to Lord.
and to Loro Piana.
Wow,
I did.
great that the show remains accessible to the every man and woman.
There's Sachs.
Really, Italy used this slogan too. Wow, my lord. Well, it's so much. Announcement today.
When in Italy, do as the Sri Lankans do. I mean, it's just human interactions, great comedy, great fun. Love to see it, but there's lots of compilations of the best moments from this show and a great catalog of content. Now on to more practical topics. Obviously, what I love about the All In podcast is insights for startup founders and entrepreneurs, understanding of geopolitics, understanding of what's going on really at a high level of publicly traded companies and strategies in tech, AI, crypto, etc. So here's a nice clip of David Sachs giving you some insight into how you can analyze the burn rate of your company.
Is your startup burning too much cash? Here's a good way to measure it. Is your startup burning too much cash? Here's a good way to measure it. I call it the burn multiple. The formula looks like this. Burn multiple equals net burn divided by net new ARR. And you want to measure this for a given period. For example, if you burn $3 million in a quarter and you generate $1 million of net new ARR, that's a burn multiple of 3. Once you measure your burn multiple, you can assess whether it's good or not. I have some rules of thumb around this. If your burn multiple is under 1, that is amazing efficiency. If your burn multiple is in the 1 to 1.5 range, that's great.
So this is just one of many, many insights where they really give you practical, tactical knowledge into running a startup, into the mindset you need to have, the focus you need to have, stories from their experience. David Sachs obviously being involved in the PayPal mafia and being involved in many other startups through Craft Ventures and through other work he does. You can really see all of this experience from some of the best in the world coming through. And it's done in such an entertaining format. These guys are just having a good time, hanging out, roasting each other, talking shop, talking about business, flipping from having a good time, just talking as friends, to also let's be serious and let's talk about this in the most intellectually honest, focused way we can to really get to the bottom of this issue and understand the world as they see it. So one of my favorite podcasts out there. If we kind of break this down on what makes it successful, I think the quality of all of these individuals and their track records, obviously these guys are legends in Silicon Valley. They have extensive experience in building companies, investing in companies. They have an incredible network of individuals that they're connected with, that they can learn from and grow with. And really, you can tell a lot of the topics they have really done some great research into, or their team has done research and made some slides. But either way, these guys are bringing the judgment call and the overall view of, where the market is going, what changes are taking place, breaking things down to first principles and understanding how to invest, how to grow your company, how the situation in different geopolitical conflicts is shaking out. So a really wide range of topics. And that's why it's become one of the best business podcasts in the world. All right, cool.
What is kind of funny is that I feel like this podcast is what you would basically see a group chat of like 4 friends do, like for me, this is what it's giving me the vibes of. If my group chat from 4 years ago, it would look like this if someone was to do a podcast out of it. So I think that's super hilarious.
And that's what people want. Yeah, people don't want the fake character. They want the real you. They want you to say a bad joke about Uranus like they constantly do. They want to roast each other. They're beeping things out when they step over the line. They're having a good time. And they're also, that's the thing is, it was almost like for a few years, you couldn't be funny and have a good time and also be smart and have good insights. And that's just not true. I mean, having a sense of comedy and a sense of humor is a sign of intelligence. So I think people are gravitating towards more of these authentic shows where people can really be intellectually honest and have good conversations and be themselves. Another great thing I love about this show, they do round robin format. So you get several different topics that are covered. And also you get a nice variety of opinions here. Like David Sachs is right-leaning politically. J-Cal is more left of center. Friedberg and Chamath more in the middle. Depending on the issue, everybody has different opinions. People aren't just towing a specific narrative. They're saying things how they see it, and they're talking both sides of the aisle. So I really love that, to really get that conversation and see people who can be friends, who can talk to each other, learn from each other, and really just try to find the best solution or let the best ideas win. All right. So on the topic of the global economy, macroeconomics, the Financial Times came out with a in-depth article on the China commodity supercycle being over and what we can expect. Can we expect the electricity cycle to step up as the world transitions more and more towards renewables and we see more battery use, more robotics, more electric vehicles. What are things going to shake out and look like? So obviously, one of the main metrics here, we have the demand for steel in China. And you can see that since 2020, the demand for steel has consistently gone down. And steel is a good metric for the amount of construction and building in a country, because steel is critical to any sort of building of infrastructure and cities and really expanding and the growth of a country. So during these explosive growth stages, you can see a lot of demand in steel, whereas developed nations basically can fill their steel demand just with recycled steel. But a growing country like China needs more and more steel. They don't have enough to build what they want to build. And you've really seen this type of chart for many different metrics with China. So you see the steel demand going down. You're obviously seeing things like the cost of labor in China going up. You've seen growth fall down. You've had the property bubble in China. And now we're kind of at a point where we've got all-time lows in a lot of commodities. So here you can see the commodity index versus the S&P 500, and you can see some of the historic peaks of the commodity cycle. So, typically in times of conflict throughout history, or in times of resource scarcity, which conflict can lead to that, you have peaks in the commodities around the world. And really, we've seen a big drop in the amount of commodities around the world. And, some people are saying that maybe this is going to lead to another commodity super cycle where we see things required for electric vehicles and batteries and renewables and artificial intelligence really taking off and making a comeback. But now we're clearly seeing bottoms in many different commodities. And with the fact that China is definitely out of its high growth stage, something we're probably going to continue to see in things like steel if we don't see another country stepping up and really having that insane demand that China had to consume as much steel and raw materials as possible. So I think that's a good transition over to a talk by Peter Zeehan about who some of the best allies for the US could be moving forward. He is a geopolitical consultant and expert, producing a lot of great insights on YouTube about his opinions. Kind of rose to prominence after predicting the war in Ukraine, just based on the history of Russia and their areas of strategic importance, and some of the actions that were happening really pushing NATO up against Ukraine. So whether you agree with that or not, he predicted that war years in advance. And has many great insights, I would say, on geopolitics and the world at large. So let's dive into his opinion on a few of the more fringe allies that would make sense for the US. Obviously, there's kind of the core traditional allies, but he also brings up something that's relevant to the previous topic of the commodity supercycle, diving into what countries would be important to make sure that America and its allies can secure the resources they need for the years ahead.
Almost didn't consider, but in the world we're moving to, a lot of the places where raw materials come from are going to be really unstable. And there are a few places in the world that are just have so much of it in incredible concentration that we're going to need them one way or the other. And the two countries in question are Saudi Arabia and the Congo. These are countries that are massive producers of raw materials that do very little with refining, very little with value added. They're basically mines with people. And we're going to have to figure out some way to continue to access the copper, the cobalt, the platinum, the palladium, the diamonds, and all that other good stuff that these two countries just have in spades. Because if we can't figure that out, the only other real player in the world that is going to be able to produce the volumes of material we need is Russia. And the whole point away from globalization is that you lose those strategic complications. So Congo, South Africa, despite all of their problems, and there's a list, so much better than dealing with Yask.
Yeah, he obviously went through all the other main allies the U.S. would have in the decades ahead. But here we see things that are relevant to this commodity supercycle, as well as relevant to some of the revolutions we're seeing in things like AI, robotics, and electrification. electric vehicles and electrification of the world. So, things like cobalt. The Congo produces something like 80% of the world's cobalt. So the Congo produces 73% of the world's global cobalt production. So really, and that's critical for things like batteries, electric vehicles, drones, robotics. Saudi Arabia, obviously one of the biggest producers of oil in the world. And in their vision for Vision 2030, I believe it's called. And in their Vision 2030, Saudi Arabia has basically taken a stance that they want to diversify their economy and be even more focused on producing these raw materials that the world needs. This was interesting because these aren't really the allies you think about, and it kind of ties into, what resources are we really going to need in the world? Because when you look at many of the world's resources, they're dominated by China producing those resources. And if we're moving towards a world where relationships between the US and China continue to escalate and it becomes more and more of a trade war, you don't want all of your raw materials being produced by your peer rival. So this is something that the United States and allies of the United States need to continue to think about and make sure that we have our supply chains diversified, because we can't be doing business with a country that doesn't let us do business, that steals our IP and doesn't play fair. If you want to play fair, if you want to open up your markets, you want to be capitalistic, let's go, let's do it. But this is no way of doing business. And so we really have to think about how we do that. Luckily, the US is incredibly rich in natural resources, but the reality is, unfortunately, most Americans, most Western countries do not want to go to work doing the mining work that is required. It's not environmentally friendly to do much of this refining and processing of these raw materials. So much of it will continue to get done outside of Western countries, and we need to make sure we have those supply chains secure. All right, awesome. Finally, just a really brief discussion of Marc Andreessen's recent appearance, talking with the Hoover Institute, talking about things like the Department of Government Efficiency, previous efforts by the US government to be more efficient and to cut spending, talking about how America is all set to enter a golden age of innovation and growth. Really a wide-ranging hour and 17-minute interview or so, where he dives into many different topics. Highly recommend you check it out. But let's dive into some of my favorite bits from his appearance there.
Let's jump up to the present. DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency, your buddies, Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy are heading it. And you yourself are participating as, you've called yourself, an unpaid intern.
Yes, correct.
You may go get me a glass of water at some point. So let's start with a very brief video. And this is a video that Elon Musk retweeted. To my surprise, it turns out to be a couple of minutes of an old interview I did with Milton Friedman.
Yes.
So here we go.
14 is a lot for television, so I want to just go right down the list quickly and have you give me a thumbs up or thumbs down.
These are
Keep them
cabinet
or
agencies.
Department of Agriculture.
Abolish.
Gone. Department of Commerce.
Abolish.
Gone. Department of Defense. Keep it from 14 departments down to
Four
and
basic
a half.
fundamental
4.5.
functions. What are its fundamental functions? Preserve the peace and the country.
All right.
Provide a mechanism whereby individuals can adjudicate their disputes. That's the
Justice Department.
Protect individuals from being coerced by other individuals. The police department, right? And now, this is both the central government and the state and local government. The police function is primarily local and central, right? And those are the fundamental functions of government in my opinion.
Okay. So, as I said, Elon Musk, there I sat with Milton Friedman. And
we're not going to get there to that like libertarian view of what a government can be, but we can definitely get back to balancing the budget. We can definitely get back to a surplus. And they talk a lot about, why is this going to be successful? Marc Andreessen brings up, Al Gore tried this back in the day. Many others have tried to really make the government more efficient. And the reality is you're going to run up against politicians who are entrenched and who have their constituents, and politicians get reelected by giving more. That has been the way that things have gone. They give more to their state, to their voters, and that's how they stay in power. And so how are you going to be able to cut the spending? And I think one of the most interesting insights he brings up here, how can Vivek and Elon really stand out and do this? And for me, what I gather is now we have the ultimate power of the people with X. We already saw this with the most recent spending bill a month or so ago, where it was actually shot down after Elon criticized it on X. It was like thousands of pages. They had like 4 days to read it. And it was full of spending and increased salary for Congress, etc. And it was, to everyone on X, it just made sense. How are you even going to read this? How does this make sense? And so that bill was shut down and broken down into a much smaller bill. And that's just kind of the first example of where we can see the power of the people to really hold the government accountable. They're going to have to show things. When things go out on X, they're going to have millions, billions of views. So you're going to have the voices to really drive the change like never before. I can find like something else here probably.
So this is the great tragedy of the domestic policies of the Nixon administration.
Of the Nixon
Of the Nixon
administration.
administration.
Right.
So Richard Nixon, when Richard Nixon saw the energy crisis coming, and it developed in his second term, started getting underway. Then he announced something he called Project Independence, and he said, "This is ridiculous. We can't be running on fossil fuels from the Middle East. This is crazy. It's entangling us in all this crazy foreign stuff. Like we need to stop. We're the United States. We can power ourselves." And so,
On which he was correct.
yes, of course, he's completely correct. He declared Project Independence. Project Independence was we're going to build 1,000 new nuclear power plants in the United States by the year 2000 and go completely independent. So we're going to cut the entire grid over to nuclear production, electrical consumption. By the way, corollary, electric cars. And so, and by the way, green, like corollary, no more carbon emissions, right? We're going to have 1,000 nuclear plants, no carbon emissions, completely green. Nuclear plants put out water with a small amount of easily contained waste, but we're going to build those. And we were building nuclear power plants, in the 50s, 60s, 70s. But by the 70s, we started to have these new technologies like computers, where you could see a way to build much more efficient and much safer plants, right? And so he announced that, and then he created the Environmental Protection Agency, and he created the Nuclear Regulatory Commission,
Which shut down which would shut down a project which, had it gone forward, would have changed everything.
Yes, and those agencies prevented Project Independence from happening.
Okay, so I think this is a brilliant stroke, and that is because it occurred to me, my own little head, in the middle of the night one night. I was tossing and turning and thought, hey, wait a minute. And here's the hey, wait a minute. The first nuclear submarine was commissioned in 1955.
Right.
Which means that the United States of America, which has nuclear powered vessels of all kinds, has been building and operating small nuclear reactors for 6 and 7 decades, and has the systems down so well that these things can be operated by 19-year-old kids who haven't even gone to finished their high school degree. And the technology is owned by the American taxpayers. Why aren't we using this?
So as you know,
Yeah, this is a huge point, right? I mean, we talk about what nuclear power can do. In Europe, there's a lot of talk about what this can do in order to really break the reliance on cheap Russian gas, but also really to just lower the cost of energy so we can be more competitive, so that our factories can operate better, so we can be more productive as nations. And this really was an eye-opening insight for me when I heard this. It makes so much sense. I mean, we've been doing these small nuclear reactors for decades. We're better at them than we've ever been. So I think we're entering a stage where we are embracing nuclear, and we're going to see a huge nuclear build out. I mean, this is like a technology from the future that has just been put on ice and hasn't been developed for a variety of reasons. Some, valid, like trying to make sure that nuclear weapons do not proliferate. But also, we're talking about a power source that can create almost infinite power. It's like the Tony Stark arc reactor, right? So it's going to be really exciting to see this industry filled out more and see more and more nuclear power done in a really smart way. I think we're going to, we're already seeing companies like Microsoft, Amazon, and Google kind of preliminarily put money behind these projects if they get approved. Meta as well, I believe. So we're going to see complete nuclear revolution in how we power the world. And, maybe we're going to see nuclear powered planes, ships, whatever it might be, more and more in the future, because this is an energy source that is so powerful and something worth exploring more. I think that's probably good for this topic.
I think something, maybe just a short note that I want to add about, you bring up like a very interesting point that, and they do as well, that I've never actually thought about. Why haven't we actually done more research into nuclear power? It's the question right now that we've had this technology for a while. Yes, it had its downsides, and the potential for it is there, but there are also disadvantages to it. But still, I think there's a lot of potential in it. I think it'll be very interesting to see what we'd be able to develop.
It's going to be really exciting to see the world really embrace nuclear power again in a big way. And, this is the ultimate solution to green power. It is the ultimate green power source. It's just really making sure that we engineer these small modular reactors in a smart way so that we prevent disasters from happening, fallout from happening. And then once we do that, we're really talking about a power source that can really scale to the level we need it to be able to get the cost of electricity down, which has productivity benefits across the economy. So it's going to be really exciting to see this take off again. A lot of great discussion on the Department of Government Efficiency, where Marc Andreessen is advising, as he says, an unpaid intern, so not an official member, but just giving input and advice where he can on how they can cut government spending. Crazy insights from that about the amount of waste going on in the government. I mean, we've seen a bunch of different posts on X about some of the crazy things that have been happening with government spending, some of the ridiculous programs around the world that taxpayer dollars have been going towards. But also, still, most government agencies, the people are working 2 days every 2 months at the office. These offices are empty. It's a ghost town. And how much work is really getting done at these agencies? How is this providing value to the country when we are trillions of dollars in debt and growing? Our interest payments are growing more and more. And that, as Ray Dalio says, is how all nations fail when they are the global reserve currency. So if we want to preserve that amazing honor to be the global reserve currency and all the power that comes with that to control your real debt level and to be able to issue your currency and build out projects, then we need to get our debt levels under control. And we can do that, and we can spur growth. And, Marc Andreessen really believes that we're going to see a golden age here with AI and the productivity gains. We're going to see robotics right around the corner. So really great content, and always excited to watch anything from Marc Andreessen. Yes, that covers it for today. I hope you enjoyed the insights from Paul Graham, Rogan, the All In Boys, commodity super cycles, some geopolitical insights from Peter Zeehan and Marc Andreessen, the Hoover Institute. Really great stuff, and excited to keep providing you guys with some more interesting insights. So make sure to like, subscribe, and let us know anything you'd like to see in the coming episodes. So time to get back to building. Cheers.